Hi everyone, this is Ashley. Because of our technical difficulties this morning, Father Danny asked me if I would re-record my sermon so that everyone could hear it better. So here it is. Enjoy. Well, here we are. We've reached the season of caps and gowns, pomp and circumstance, speeches and parties. Usually this time of year, we would have a homily from one of our graduating seniors, but nothing is usual this spring. So when Danny asked if I would speak today, I first tried to embody myself at 18 years old and think about what I wanted to hear on my graduation. I'm sure I felt like the future was mine to conquer and the whole world was at my feet. And I'm sure I rolled my eyes when somebody inevitably quoted from, admittedly my favorite, Oh, the Places You'll Go by Dr. Seuss. But here we are. There's a reason this Dr. Seuss classic has become a staple of graduation speeches, toasts, and sermons. That guy knew how to make people feel like they could do anything. We were gonna move mountains, kids. Dr. Seuss said it, and 18-year-old me believed it. I wanted to believe it. But sometimes what we want to hear and what we need to hear are different. In today's gospel, Jesus proves this is one idea that he fully embraced. During this Easter season, I've been trying to look at our story from the disciples' point of view. First, the grief and fear in the wake of Jesus' death. Then the shock and disbelief that comes with hearing he had returned. The joy and surprise of being able to touch and see and speak to their mentor and friend again. Acts that seem impossible to the human mind. At this point in our story, I imagine what the disciples wanted to hear was that it was time to take the kingdom, time for all the prophecies and predictions of old to come to fruition. But sometimes what we need to hear isn't necessarily what we want to hear. Last week in John, Jesus begins to say goodbye. I imagine this was the disciples' train of thought. Goodbye? What do you mean goodbye? You just got back and you're leaving us alone? That's not what anyone wants to hear. But Jesus knew what the disciples needed to hear. And Jesus didn't leave the disciples alone. He sent them an advocate, a companion, a helper. The victory doesn't look like what the disciples envisioned, and the future is intimidating and bleak. But they are not alone. When we talk about Dr. Seuss during graduation, we tend to focus on the exciting, world-changing aspects, and we glance over the middle part of the story. So here's what we need to hear. To our high school graduates, the world is at your feet. You will move mountains. You are going to conquer the future. Except when you don't, because sometimes you won't. Bang-ups and hang-ups happen. And sometimes life will leave you in a slump. You may go through experiences where there is no roadmap, when you have to blaze a new trail and make up your own mind. You may end up in, dun dun dun, the waiting place. So many of us end up waiting for something, anything, to happen to us. When I left for college, I left a church that had held me in prayer, cared for my soul, and fostered my faith. I arrived on a campus of 30,000 people and thought, I got this. I got so caught up in the worldly activities of classes and Greek life and clubs and social events that I forgot there was an Episcopal student ministry on campus. St. Anselm's was literally 50 yards from the building where most of my freshman classes were held, and I stepped foot in the building one time my freshman year. And freshman year was hard. I got all mixed up, as Dr. Seuss might say, but I was definitely not sure when I stepped. I lost myself. I lost my voice. And I was miserable. I took a summer job as a camp counselor at St. Crispin's, the Oklahoma equivalent of Camp Mitchell, and began to find myself again. I found my faith again. I found that steady companion, the Holy Spirit, again. In reality, the Holy Spirit had never left me. I just stopped looking for it. A wise woman recently said that the spirit of truth that Jesus is referring to in today's gospel is the truth of love. I had been living in the world's truth, which is confusing and complicated and at odds with itself. When I began to live in God's truth, that is the truth of love, I realized how much of myself I had set aside. When I returned to school that next fall, I quit waiting for things to happen to me. I gathered the love I received and the strength that the Spirit's presence provided and inserted myself into a community of faith that had always been there. That community became my family at college, and the Holy Spirit was in the midst of us whenever we were together. That community, and a gentle nudge or two from the Holy Spirit, led me to my calling of youth ministry. The Holy Spirit has brought that same community together over the last 11 years through weddings and funerals and babies and all the everyday struggles of life again and again. Jesus promises to send an advocate, and that extends to us too. He sends us an advocate, a companion, a helper. One definition of the word advocate is called alongside. When we remember that the Holy Spirit is called alongside us, no matter what space we're occupying, our relationship with the Spirit and in turn with Jesus is transformed. When we realize that by grace, God gave us Christ, and through his teachings, Jesus leaves us with love, we clearly see that everything we do connects back to God. When we look for the Holy Spirit among us, we can't help but see it everywhere we turn. What we need to hear in our every phase of life, what we need to hear in our world now, is that we are not alone. When the world seems dark and the directions unclear, we simply need to remember this: God's got this. He will never leave us abandoned. We don't have to face the hack and cracks or loneliness or waiting places in our lives alone. In God, we live and move and have our being. By that gift in itself, we are never alone. We live in the love of a living Christ. We make choices and move through the phases of life in the love of a living Christ. Our very breath comes from the love of a living Christ. We are given a spirit to travel with us through the darkest of nights and the brightest of days. That same spirit helps us sort through the complicated truths of the world to find peace in the truth that is love. I know for our graduates, there's a lot of uncertainty and anxiety of what comes next. Honestly, in my own life, there's a lot of uncertainty and anxiety over what comes next. I think the whole world is feeling that way right now. And that is why today I am grateful for the Holy Spirit and for Dr. Seuss. As we move through these uncertainties, let us remember this advice from Oh, the Places You'll Go. So be sure when you step with care and great tact, and remember that life's a great balancing act. When we choose to act in love, instead of through the world's truths, the great balancing act of life doesn't necessarily become easier, but it does become gentler. With the Holy Spirit as our guide, our roadmap becomes straightforward. With the Holy Spirit by our side, we all might just move mountains after all.